What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Devereaux YouTube channel. We're back with our top 25 series. We got 3 teams left. That's right, we got 3 teams. Today, we're talking number 3 Oregon Ducks. We're going to be diving into the 2024 preview. Notable losses. What's their offense and defense look like? What do those transfers out there look like? Because they got a ton, especially on offense. What's the recruiting class? Who do you guys have coming in to replenish your team? And in their schedule, we're going to be diving into it. They are Big Ten favorites. Why are they Big Ten favorites? That's what we're going to get into and kind of diving in. But last year, let's talk about what the Oregon Ducks did. 12-2. They lost 2 games last year. Unfortunately, both to Washington, one in the Pac-12 championship, one in the regular season, and by 3 points each. So they lost 2 games. That was it, by 6 points total. They looked very, very good last year. Bo Nix, he turned himself into a first-round draft pick. You have to give him credit out there. 4,500 yards, 45 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Bucky Irving, 1,100 yards rushing, 11 touchdowns. And just from an offensive standpoint, they were one of the best offenses in the country. But obviously, lost those 2 games to Washington. Had they made the playoff, I think they would have made noise. I think that Michigan would have been, as a Michigan fan, I would have been more nervous playing Oregon than I was Washington, just because of that offense and what they were able to do. They won the Fiesta Bowl 45-6 against Liberty, but they weren't happy with that. Dan Lanning done a good job, but they definitely got to get over the hump. They're looking for a championship in something. Give me a Big Ten championship or a national championship there. Now, this year, heading into the offense and talking about kind of what they do, this offense really isn't changing. They went out there and got Dylan Gabriel, and they're just going to probably run the same system that they did with Bo Nix. 41.4 points per game. They're a top 5 unit last year in that. Yards per game, they average over 500 yards a game. They were number 2 offense on that side. Third down conversion rate on offense, they were number 3 in the country. It was hard keeping this field this offense off the field. 51% there is a very, very good number. From a passing standpoint, they were number 1 in 3 metrics. When you're looking at that, passing yards per game, 344. QB sacks, they were number 1 in that. 1%. That was it. They get the ball out quick, and their offensive line did a good job of blocking. And completion percentage, they're at 76% based on that scheme. And that's really what they did well. Running, they were fine, but just from a unit, they didn't run the ball a ton. And in rushing yards per game, they were a top 50 unit. Not amazing, but when they needed to, they could. But this is a passing offense. They get it down the field quick, and they explode there. Now, what can we expect from them this year? Christian's going to talk about kind of the things that they brought in, and what does that offense look like?
First thing, offensive coordinator Will Stein, just a remarkable job last year, and that's going to continue. Like you mentioned, it's going to be the same system. Dylan Gabriel's another experienced quarterback that can make quick decisions. Sometimes it's certainly a downgrade at quarterback. Bo Nix was a lot better than what Dylan Gabriel was last year at the very least. We'll see if Gabriel can grow in the system. Offensive line is looking absolutely fantastic. You return 2 of the top tackles in the country, I think. Connerly, you can see all the potential. He hasn't quite put everything together yet, but if he does, he's going to be a first-round draft pick. Johnny Cornelius made my first-round mock because while he doesn't have the athletic upside that maybe Connerly does, he is just so technically sound. He's such a good right tackle. So Dylan Gabriel is going to have a nice little pocket to work in, and he's going to be distributing the ball to, one of the better wide receiver cores in the nation. Evan Stewart comes in, maybe a disappointing last year. I don't think he wanted to be at Texas A&M. We'll talk about that when we get to the transfers, but I just want to rave about Tez Johnson, who I think is one of the best wide receivers in the country. I think he's better than Evan Stewart. I think he is their best wide receiver. He makes things happen after the catch. He's very, very small, but it doesn't matter because he doesn't go down on first contact very often. Just a remarkable, remarkable player that I think will see an increased role this year. Terrence Ferguson, great tight end prospect, has been a really good pass catcher for them. And that's not even talking about, I think Jordan James is better than Bucky Irving as a runner. I don't think he's as good as a pass catcher, but just from an efficiency perspective, James looks like he can carry a larger load if they need that. And so to me, this offense, while there's a downgrade at quarterback, I'm going to bet on the system and bet on the incoming talent and say, I think it could be just as good or even better this year.
They did what they needed to do, right? They brought in Dylan Gabriel, and they said, all right, you're going to be our 6-year guy. He's coming in as a 6-year player. It's a la Bo Nix, right? And he's never had that huge production when he's played, right? Like, so when you're looking at him, 3,600 yards is kind of where he's topped out at as a passer at UCF and at Oklahoma last year. But he fits this system to a T. They did a good job. He just fits it. Like, and hey, get the ball out quick, get to your playmakers, and then bringing in Evan Stewart is pretty good there. And shout out Terrence Ferguson, tight end out there. He's the John Mackey Award preseason watch list. Very solid tight end. Like when you're thinking about him, I thought he possibly go pro. He didn't. He came back, and you're looking at it like, hey, this guy's very solid in that room. From the losses, we talked about him. Jackson Powers Johnson, I think, is a loss. I know that. I was a huge fan on him before he dropped down a little bit in the draft. Troy Franklin, yes. Bucky Irving, yes. But they got guys coming in that area there. And Bo Nix, I think, it was surprising 3 years ago. 2 years ago, we were kind of like, hey, what's Bo Nix going to be coming over there from Auburn? But he was. I mean, they could have made the playoff. They should have won the Pac-12. Like, those are the things that they should have done behind Bo Nix, and he improved so much last year. I thought 2 years ago he still struggled with sometimes at decision-making, those type of things. I thought last year this kid was on fire. So those are some big losses there, but I think Jackson Powers Johnson is definitely a loss.
For sure. I think the good piece, and I didn't get into it because I just had to rave about the skill players, but a lot of the players replacing noted starters at this point are going to be experienced players. They got a lot of snaps last year, so they rotated enough where you're feeling pretty good about that. But Jackson Powers Johnson was one of my favorite players in the draft last year. So,
all right, let's get into the recruiting class. When we look at the 2024 recruits, number 4 overall, Oregon has been absolutely crushing the recruiting trail. So in 2024, top 4 unit, number 3 composite rank as well. Jeremiah McClellan is kind of their big get out there when you're talking about number 18 overall wide receiver. But they've done a really good job of attacking that wide receiver. Jerion Dickey is still out there, right? We were thinking of him like coming off that injury last year. Jaquan McCroy, offensive tackle, Ryan Pelham, Fox Crater, Dylan Gresham. They just went and got guys. And they fill out very good needs. They really recruit California hard. And then they go look at different states to kind of fill in the needs when they need to, right? Jeremy McClellan from Missouri. Those type of guys there. I'm a big fan of this class. I think they did a good job there. The asterisk is down there at the bottom. Gatlin Barr, he was one of those guys in Idaho that they really like, 6'1", 194, number 6 rated wide receiver in terms of his position. But he's going to be gone for a couple of years on a mission. So it's one of those things we're going to have to wait for him. But very, very solid class here.
Yeah, he's the one. There's a reason he's at the bottom of the list because very, very talented player that I think can be an impactful player for them once he gets back. But it's going to be a couple of years. Impressive work on the offensive line front, in my opinion. I just there's not a ton of players. 4 I think offensive linemen here, but 2 4-stars and some big boys. 6'8", 365 for McCroy. 6'6", 285 from Crater. So there's a lot of good stuff happening in the Oregon recruiting program right now. Just taking shots on a ton of recruits too. I think volume's going to be helpful here. And now in the Big Ten, you have to recruit like this or you're not going to be competitive. So I think they're doing a really good job.
Yeah, and Crater, when you're looking at his background and what he does, when you talk about him, plays left tackle, good flexibility, basketball background. So they talked about him, the recruiting scouts out there at 6'6", 285. They talked about his basketball background, his ability to kind of do pass protection and run blocking. Just consistency is needed. Man, he's already at 6'6", 285. They get him in that weight room. He could be a boy. He can be a boy in that offense and definitely do a good job there. When you talk about transfers, obviously they had a number 3 rated transfer class. Dylan Gabriel, Evan Stewart, we didn't even really mention him. Dante Moore coming from UCLA. When we talked about Dante Moore going into as a 5-star at UCLA, the big thing we talked about is experience, his ability to lead an offense, and just overall just his ability to play quarterback. I was a huge Dante Moore fan. He got experience last year still at the D1 level in the Pac-12, and whether or not that was a great fit for him, obviously it wasn't as he got out of there, and so did his coach. Kelly left as well to Ohio State. But when you're looking at it overall, this is a great guy just to have as a backup, also just to kind of give you that depth, but also can come in and play if he needs to. If anything happened to Gabriel, I don't think you're off the rockers in terms of your ability to win the Big Ten or even go to the playoff with Dante Moore there. That was a great grab there. Jay Harris as well, and then Matthew Bedford.
Yeah, Dante Moore last year, it was really an unfortunate situation where they didn't have an offensive line good enough for him, and they didn't have wide receivers good enough for him, to be completely honest. And so there was a lot of good stuff that was coming out of the first few games, and then the bad habits started to develop. And so I'm glad he got out and he got to a place that is recruiting offensive linemen and is drawing wide receivers, because Dante Moore can still be a top 5 pick in the NFL draft at some point. And I think that this is a perfect situation where he sits and he learns behind an experienced guy, and then he goes in there, and I think he's their starter next year. And they don't have to hit the portal for an experienced guy anymore.
Yeah, no, 100%. And when we're talking about offensive side, impact players, Dylan Gabriel, Tez Johnson, Evan Stewart, Jordan James. The guy, I mean, everybody knows if you've watched the channel a lot. I love Evan Stewart. I've been a big Evan Stewart fan from when he came in at Texas A&M. I think the thing to note about Evan Stewart last year, first 2 games of the year, this dude was cooking. 17 catches, over almost 300 yards receiving, and 2 touchdowns. Then that Miami game, Connor Wegman kind of got banged up. That offense wasn't looking very good, and they just didn't give him the football. But when they did, I mean, this kid averaged around 15, 16 yards per catch in those games that they did. And I think the big thing that always stands out to me about Alabama, when he played Alabama, Alabama schemed to him. Alabama tried to get him to stop him. That was the guy Nick Saban said, hey, we got to stop Evan Stewart. And that part of me is like, man, if Nick Saban wants to stop you and really kind of scheming for you, especially as his background as a cornerback coach and really trying to be in the cornerback range, Evan Stewart could really still have that first round buzz out there. And I think if Tez, we know as good as he is, if Evan Stewart can also be a first round prospect, second round, kind of that playmaking guy, this offense could be one of the best in the Big Ten.
Yeah, I think A&M was just a really rough situation last year, and really had been. Stewart was kind of growing. I don't think he was very comfortable there anymore. So I think this is a good change of scenery. But like I mentioned earlier, Tez Johnson's my dude. He's my wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4, I think, on film alone. But the production's just insane. One of the better on film players last year. So I think those two make it really hard for Dylan Gabriel to be bad this year, to be honest.
Yeah, and I'm not going to – I can't get out of the offensive side, but that's how our boy Trayshawn Holden. Come on, Holden. We were fans of you for a long time there. Like, I think that's a very solid X for them. Will he have the production of the other guys? No. But he definitely is someone there. Noah Whittington as well from a pass catching back in the backfield, I think could be there. And even like Jaden Lamar or DeJohn Riggs, excuse me, those guys can definitely be depth in that running back room there from a defensive side. So as we go over to defense, they were very, very solid last year. Opponent points per game, they were 10th in the nation at 17.2 giving up. Third down conversion, they were okay. They were number 40 unit there. Opponent points play, yards per game, they were top 20 unit in that range. Really what stood out to them was their rushing defense. Their rush defense was very, very good last year. Opponent rush play percentage was number 1. They were number 1 there. They just did not get ran against because teams just kind of gave up on that range. Opponent yards per rush was only 3.5. That's a top 25 number there. And opponent rushing per game was 28. They just kept them off the field in terms of that. They did throw against them, though. So when you're looking at what they did from a secondary standpoint, they struggled there. Opponent passing yards per game, they were 65th last year. Opponent interception thrown, they were 72nd. Didn't get a ton of takeaways. And I think that's kind of the key for them on the defensive side there. And sack percentage was in the 50th mark. They were at 6.72%, which didn't get a ton of pressure there, which definitely hurt their secondary. So that's the area definitely they got to address.
Yeah, and I think they did a good job in getting some pieces into that secondary. Jabbar Muhammad's coming in, and one of the better cornerback prospects last year. I thought he was going to declare. I think he would have been a day 2 NFL draft selection last year. Tyshon Johnson was pretty good for them last year, really, really good on the tackling front. But Kobe Savage is coming in to kind of man the back end with him. Mateo Uiagalelei was pretty good when he was out there last year. Not a lot of production out of him, but I think we are going to see some opportunities for guys to step up in this defense. I think, there's not a lot of recognizable names to non-Oregon fans, to be completely honest. But like when you watch the film on most of these guys, like you can see a path where they're going to continue to be solid. They're going to continue to keep the offense. The offense it's kind of inverted for Oregon, where the offense makes life easier on the defense because they're so efficient. They can stay on the field if they want, or they can get off the field super quick. I think that's going to help this defense, but really, a lot of incoming talent that I think is going to be impactful for them this year.
Yeah, no, 100%. And again, the sack percentage was bad. They did have 34 sacks last year. So it wasn't like they were terrible. So they definitely is like they had growth, and that was one area where they needed to make a stride last year. So you have to really like that with what they got from Muhammad is the big get, and we'll get into him, but that was a big get for them on that side. From a losses standpoint, when you're looking at this, Kyrie Jackson, left, obviously, and then unfortunately he passed away. So, prayers out to him and his family. Brandon Dorless and then Evan Williams there. So not a ton of guys that they had to replace in terms of production standpoint. Obviously, Kyrie was the big one. 7 pass deflection, 3 interceptions, really made a name for himself out there, kind of reinvented himself at Oregon. But after that, I mean, Evan Williams also 82 tackles, 4.5 sacks. So those two guys were big there. But usually when you see this list for like a top 5 program, you're looking at a ton of guys that you're having to replace, and that's not necessarily the case here.
Yeah, Dorless was huge for them. I do think Jordan Birch can kind of step up and give some more sack production. But Dorless was, I think, their second leading sack getter last year. But the hurries and the pressures and all of that stuff was really, really underrated. So they're going to look to get some production out of some other guys. I think that's the big one. Kyrie Jackson was great for them last year.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a tough loss, from a team perspective, obviously from a humanity perspective as well. But Jabbar Muhammad coming in is really going to help ease that on the defensive side. He's just so good. And so I think they're in okay shape. You're right. Most teams have a long list here, and they don't really have that this year.
No, and they did a great job on the on the recruiting trail for the defensive side. Listen, Elijah Rushing, Aiden Braylon, really, really good there. Jericho Johnson, the guy that I wrote about that I think could have a significant impact this year. Aaron Flowers, defensive back, safety type player there. He was a number 7 rated safety in the class. He was very, very good. He's versatile though. So 6 foot 202. He can actually kind of move in and out of safety, cornerback. Like he moves around. In high school, he did that. His senior season, 73 tackles, 49 of them solo tackles, 7 interceptions, 4 passes defended. Like he was one of the best Texas 5A players out there. Like he did a great job in Texas 5A. Really, really quick closing speed, man. When you watch his high school tape, his ability to close the gap against receivers and adjust to reads from the quarterback, very, very good. And I think his athleticism is just one of those things where it's like, man, this guy in the secondary, his versatility, he provides them depth at every position in the secondary because Aaron Flowers can move around. And that's what I really like about him on tape. But even Dakota Fields is really good. Sims, these guys are just solid. Look at all these 4-star guys they brought in on that side and their 5-star in rushing.
Yeah. So rushing is such a big get for them because I just talked about Dorless and how he was impactful for them. Well, rushing is one of those guys that you can plug in on multiple spots on that defensive line too at 6'6", 251, and strong, like really, really strong. I think he's going to be an impact player for them as well. So if you're getting 2, maybe 3, 4 impact freshmen on this defense, then we're talking a different ballgame. And maybe we're talking about should be the title favorites, or at least the Big Ten favorites, because you look at across up and down that defense, like I said, not a lot of name brand there, but a lot of really, really solid players. And then you're adding this group of 4 and 5-star players and just a couple of 3-stars here. We're talking about a lot of upside. I can't say it because it's frowned upon. Georgia-like upside in a couple of years on defense, if they continue recruiting like this, that's something. They're doing a fantastic job, especially on defense here.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, I cannot see a scenario where Oregon is not in the college football playoff for the next 5 years if they continue to do this. Like, I just can't see it. I think they're going to be competing for Big Ten championships every single year. And the reason why is they don't mind going after transfers either. So Jamar Muhammad, Kobe Savage, Peyton Woodward, Caldwell, Alexander, Brandon Johnson there. And really, the Jabbar Muhammad one was a big get for them when you're looking at that. And I thought that, he's an all Pac-12 second team selection last year, first team by the AP press. When you're looking at that, started all 15 games for Washington, 46 tackles, 3 interceptions, 5 tackles for loss, 19 passes defended last year. That was Muhammad out there. And you have to love that. That was tied for second nationally there, tied for second in the Pac-12 for interception. So very, very solid player, but he just gives that defense that edge that they need, that leadership in the secondary that can kind of get moved around a little bit and just kind of gives them that leadership they're going to need when they're playing Ohio State and some of these other teams in the Big Ten.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a huge fan. I think Kobe Savage is a big get as well. The Pro Football Focus grades aren't going to always be favorable to him, but he's a really good tackler. And so when he can at least mop up a lot of tackles, I think having that on the back end there and then just taking more shots at corner. I think that's huge. I think there's a pretty good shot that some of these incoming freshmen push some of these other
Yeah.
guys out of rotations, and I think that's a good spot to be in, because these guys are good enough to play there. That's a reason they went out and got them, and if they're not playing, that just means that they're too talented, which good problem.
Yeah.
Every team wishes they had that problem.
100%. And when we're talking about impact players over there, Birch, Muhammad, Cabo, Alexander, we've talked about these guys a lot. Jordan Birch, to me, can he take that next step, right? He had 3 sacks last year, the 7.5 tackles for loss on that defensive line. Is he going to be able to kind of get pressure? And can he get in that 7-8 sack range, right? Can he kind of go there? And Mateo Uyangalele, what is he going to be? 2 sacks. But when you're looking at tackles for loss, can he take that next step as well? I know he was a huge get a couple years ago on that defensive front.
Yeah, I didn't mention him in the last slide because I wanted to talk about him here. But Cam Alexander, 4 years he's coming in as a 5th-year guy, has graded progressively better per PFF every single year in school. He was at Sam Houston for 3 years, went to UTSA last year, but should be an impact player for them this year. His coverage grades have just a steady incline. He's really, really good. And when you put him opposite Jabbar Muhammad, I think you're in pretty good shape in that secondary, which, like you mentioned, was part of their weak point last year. The sacks and then part of the secondary. So to me, Cam Alexander has a chance to really make a name for himself this year.
Now, when we get into the schedule, over under 10.5, because I think they're going to be Big Ten right there, the Big Ten championship. Idaho, Boise State, at Oregon State, at UCLA versus Michigan State. Not a ton of tough ones out there when you're looking at that. But big games versus Ohio State, a game that I'm trying to get to. Oregon fans, I'm trying to get out there to go watch this game. At Purdue versus Illinois, at Michigan, which is tough. Maryland, Wisconsin, Washington. A Washington program that's, I don't know. It'd be interesting to see kind of what they're going to be. I think they only have 3 players returning from that roster from last year. So, that's a whole different team out there. But I think I'm over. I'm comfortably over. I think they hit 11 wins in this schedule, and I think they're one of the best teams in the Big Ten.
I think they might go undefeated.
Okay.
I think they can easily beat Ohio State. We talked about. We haven't talked about that one yet, but I talked about it in my head, I guess. We talked about the Michigan one for sure, and I do think going to Michigan that late in the year, you don't know what Michigan is, and maybe Michigan's kind of found their footing by then. But I would bet on Oregon having the experience and having the quarterback that I think can win them the game there.
Yeah.
The other thing on the schedule, I want Dante Moore to start that UCLA game. I just want to see that. I know it won't happen, but UCLA is in a spot where Dante Moore is certainly going to play in that game, and I would really like to see that. So I'm going over here as well. I think this could be a 12-win team.
Dylan Gabriel is better than Will Howard, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I kind of look at that Ohio State game. I think defensively it's gonna be a barn burner. I think that Ohio State's defense is the best in the country. But at home, they got a shot. They can take out Ohio State pretty comfortably there. But I'm over. I think that it would not shock me if we're sitting here and we're talking about Oregon being the national champions next year in January. That's how good this team is. I do think, when you're looking at it from a Lanning perspective, there's been some coaching things sometimes, like some decisions out there, maybe going for it when he shouldn't, little things like that. But the idea is, hey, he's probably learned from that. And I don't mind aggressiveness. I think that there's definitely been some moments in there against Washington for, perspective, and a couple other, like, hey, why did you do that? And I think that one thing that rings, remember when he got his ass kicked by Georgia a couple of years ago? He looked at that recruiting and said, I got to go get dudes. I got to go recruit. And he's done that. And then when you're just looking at it more, in the future, 2025, they already have a top 10 class. DeCorian Moore, the wide receiver from Texas, just committed their number 1 wide receiver in the class. Trey McNutt, number 1 safety out there. Like, these guys he's getting dudes now. So from a developmental standpoint, recruiting standpoint, they should be in the playoff for the next 5 years. I think they can win the national title this year with the depth that they have and with the team and the offense they got coming back.
Yeah, and with the way they're recruiting, I think if Dante Moore, takes some steps forward in his backup role this year, I think we could be talking about them as title contenders next year too, because they're going to continue to have dudes. Like you mentioned, they've been killing it on the recruiting trail, but they aren't afraid to go into the portal either. So, they can keep their window open as long as they want, in theory, especially when, Michigan struggles to get in transfers and Ohio State might be going through a coaching change if Oregon wins that game this year. I think we're talking about a different ball game in Ohio State. So Oregon might be the Big Ten favorite for the next 5 years, and that's a weird spot to be in for the Oregon football program. But these might be the most glorious days of this program.
Yeah, no, I think so too. I think they're going to win a national championship. I think in the next 3 years, we're talking about Oregon winning one. I think they can get one if they continue to do that. So what do you think in there and out there, Oregon fans? Todd, where are you at? You think you guys can win a national title? You think you're beating Ohio State? I hope you beat Ohio State. Please beat Ohio State. And where does that come down to this year? Do you think Lanny's doing enough to kind of get those football recruits coming for you guys in the the Big Ten, and then competing against SEC teams too? We didn't talk about Georgia yet. Georgia's still out there. They're still pretty good out there, Georgia Bulldogs. So you still got to recruit well enough to kind of beat them and go after them. They're the big dogs now. Now that Saban's out of the SEC, I think Kirby Smart is now in that totem pole. So you got to take them out as well. So let's know what you think, Oregon fans. Can you beat Georgia? Can you beat Ohio State? Can you go for a national title this year? Where do you think this team is at?